While you might not agree with the antics, Jorge Lopez was right about one thing. Right now, the Mets are the worst team in baseball.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. SupplyHouse.com is the reliable way to get parts fast, shop for your next plumbing, HVAC, or electrical job, and get fast shipping from coast to coast at SupplyHouse.com. Well, on a day where the Mets saw their $100 million closer hit the IL and their star first baseman in a contract year gets hit in the hand, has to exit the game, and could also be heading to the IL, we are not opening the show with those two injuries. Instead, it is another episode in what has been a soap opera of a season, really just a team that is perpetually stuck in a soap opera. This Mets group just finds new ways to entertain us, shock us, awe us, and it's rarely positive. And Jorge Lopez is the latest event, and it's going to be one that is talked about for years. Do you remember that time where that guy threw his glove in the stands and called the Mets the worst bleeping team in Major League Baseball? Do you remember that? Because that's going to be told from generation to generation for decades even. I'm telling you, these are the things that Mets fans don't forget about. So we are marking a moment in sad, pitiful Mets history tonight. But everything that happened, and forget a game recap. I'll give you a game recap. David Peterson was good, not great, went 5 innings, allowed 3 runs, 2 of them earned. The Mets tied it up. Tomas Nido, 2-run homer. JD Martinez, RBI double. It was knotted at 3 going to the 8th inning, and we saw another implosion by the bullpen, including Jorge Lopez. So there you go. There's your game recap. It was another bad game, but it was another example of how this team has become an embarrassment. And that's what it is. That is the reality of the situation. And Jorge Lopez was the human embodiment of what Mets baseball feels like right now. Lack of professionalism, lack of accountability, even though he might have been trying to be accountable with his comments because it is a little bit of a language barrier. It's Jorge Lopez's second language. Was he calling himself the worst teammate on the worst team in baseball? Was he just trying to say he's the worst teammate? However, it ended up shaking out. The bottom line is Jorge Lopez was close enough to say this is the worst team in Major League Baseball because that is what they have been. And he walked off the field in the 8th inning as he got ejected for arguing what should have been a strike call on a check swing. But he got thrown out, quick hook, frustrations boiled over. He untucks his shirt on his way to the dugout. Not supposed to do that. And then he does what you absolutely aren't ever supposed to do, which is launch your glove into the stands. So that's a horrible optic. And of course, that necessitates a meeting from Carlos Mendoza and David Stearns after the game. We still don't know exactly the timeline. Did that happen before Lopez's tirade in front of the cameras? We don't know. What we do know is the game ended and the Mets closed the doors to the locker room and Francisco Lindor held a 20-minute meeting where all the guys were airing out their dirty laundry. And as much as the Lopez story is interesting and it's buzzy and everyone wants to talk about it, I think we can almost put that to bed, understanding that it's a frustrated player who just talked himself off the roster. And we'll go through the implications of that in the next segment. I want to talk about the guy that's getting paid $341 million across a 10-year deal, a guy who is making more than anyone on this team, who has struggled just as much as anyone. And yet, if you look at who has been the most valuable player in the New York Mets this season, it has still been Francisco Lindor. I know Mets fans are going to push back on that. They see the average, whatever it is. I'll tell you right now, as someone who covers baseball, works in the game of baseball, I spend all day on this stuff. By every statistical measurement, Lindor has been the Mets' best player still, and that's part of the problem because he's not having his typical season. But with all of that said, I'm going to put a link to his interview that he had with the media or his media session in the episode description today. And I encourage every single Mets fan to watch it, especially those of you who hate Francisco Lindor. Because what Lindor did today after this game is commendable, and it shows a level of leadership that we haven't seen in that clubhouse since David Wright. I'm going to go that far out of limb and say that because I watched him answer questions with precision and accountability for 11 minutes. 11 minutes talking to the New York media, a guy that got here, 4 years ago, who booed the fans, all the stuff that you want to talk about in the past. There's a reason why this guy, I believe, will eventually get it right and be part of I don't know about a championship winning Mets team, but a really good Mets team in the future. And he's going to be at the forefront of it. And you're going to realize why this is a really good player who deserves every penny of what he's making. Because in that 11 minutes, he took accountability for himself, his team. He talked about why it was time to hold that players only meeting to have guys air it out. Because he said a lot of times after these games, and if you win, everyone's talking and chatting it up. It's like if you lose, guys are going off to the training room. They're going to the showers. They're going to get food. It's not, or they're on their phones. There's not that communication. He said even if you're at team dinners, on the bus, plane, it's not often that you just have that meeting where you look each other eye to eye, man to man, and talk about what's going on. And he mentioned how you don't want to be completely underwater by the time you get to the trade deadline. He said, I'm not a good swimmer. You don't want to do that. You want to keep your head above water as long as you can. He talked about the decisions that the Mets front office is going to have to make at the deadline, the reality of the baseball season, how when you get to the deadline, the front office is going to have to make some decisions about whether to look ahead towards next year or to think about August and September. And he wants the Mets to add, not subtract, because he's a competitor and he doesn't want a lost season. And trying to stop a lost season from happening, even though it's a boulder rolling downhill that he's trying to push back on. And maybe there's not a lot of guys that are coming up next to him to help. Not to say he's been great. He hasn't, but the whole team has been bad. It's not Francisco Lindor's fault that the bullpen came in and gave up 6 runs in the 8th inning. But even he had the opportunity to throw Jorge Lopez under the bus or anybody else under the bus. And you watch that interview, he doesn't. He had his teammates back, not even realizing that he wasn't going to be his teammate anymore in Jorge Lopez. He said it wasn't Jorge Lopez's fault what happened. He said he's a competitor. He said he made good pitches except for the 1-2 Ohtani. Like, he completely stood behind his teammate as a good leader should. And he went through the process, and then when asked by reporters, did Lopez say anything in the players only meeting? Lindor again had his teammates back across the board. So I don't want to talk about who said what in that meeting. That's not for public consumption, right? It's not to say that meeting's going to fix all. Do I believe that this is the moment that the Mets season turn around? I don't know. How can anyone buy into this team right now? It's really hard to. And you could talk about how they're better than they should be. And you look at a team like the Colorado Rockies, who have just been horrible for the last couple of years and started this season the worst team in baseball. We're working on our power rankings at justbaseball.com, and I'm part of the group that decides what to do with that. I'm ready to put the Mets at the bottom, and I'll be the one writing part of it too, and I'll make the case for it because I'll say, look, over the last month, if you're talking about power rankings, no one's been worse than the Mets. The Rockies, with way less talent, have been 500 this month, and they have a winning record since like May 9th or something like that. I don't have the exact stat in front of me, but over like a 3 or 4 week span, they have been a winning team. Teams can win in Major League Baseball without the top echelon talent, and the Mets certainly have enough to win games. But do I think this is a turning point? I don't know. We will see. We'll see how this team responds to the adversity. They haven't so far. Maybe there's another gear. Maybe this was a moment that was so bad that you just have to get up from it, that it just changes the direction of the season because it hit a point that is so awful that eventually people change their process and they get in line. But what I think can't be lost in this, and that's why I want all of you to listen to Francisco Lindor's comments, is the Mets' best player, who's making the most money, was accountable to the New York media in a time where it's not easy to. And if you want to give a grade on something, he was A+ in that session. And he owned what's been an awful year. And if you think this guy's not working his ass off to try to make it better, then you're just not paying attention. So I understand why Mets fans are pissed off right now. You should be. Okay. I'm investing my time in this team every night. Obviously, for me, I have other reasons to do that. Before Locked On Mets, I'll be completely honest, I'll own it. If you talk to me circa 2014 or 2016, whatever it is, 16 was a good year. Actually, 410 I held on to. I had to go back before that. That was about the turning point for me where I did start to watch even when the Mets didn't have their best moments. But if you go back to earlier years of my teenage life, if I saw a Mets team like this, I would have tuned out by now. But the point is, I, like many of you, are committed to watching the 2 hours plus of Mets baseball we get every night because that's what I do in the summer. And the Mets have let you down as Mets fans this season and last season as well. And it is frustrating. And I understand you look at Francisco Lindor, you see the 211 batting average, and he's making the most money. It is a very easy guy to point fingers at. But I challenge you again to watch that press conference or whatever, the media session. You watch those 11 minutes of Francisco Lindor handling those questions. And I urge you to really think long and hard about what more this guy could be doing right now. Baseball is a hard game. And I'll also note if you remove the 1 for 38 start to the season, Lindor's numbers would look a lot better than they do right now. I did that as a thought exercise the other day. I went and sorted the stats, and it's not Francisco Lindor of last year, but it's a lot closer than you'd expect, and he's still been a top 20 player in baseball since that 1 for 38 start. But again, considering everything that happened today, I think the as someone that tries to find a positive spin on everything, and that's just who I am. So if you hate it, that's fine. But to see the way he had accountability for his team, the leadership that he showed, I personally am proud that Francisco Lindor is a New York Met. I'll leave it at that. Now, when it comes to Jorge Lopez, what happens next, the bullpen, all that stuff, we're going to talk about it next. Edwin Diaz on the IL, should probably talk about that too. So I'll get to the fallout from this and what happens moving forward. But this was, I think, frustration from a month's worth of sucking that has boiled over for this team. And maybe as you get very close to turning the page on the month of May into June, hopefully the Mets can find their way to, at least more competitive baseball and less meltdowns, less blowups, less, horrible nights. So we'll talk about what's next for this bullpen and more in just a minute. First, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Supply House. Get supplies from the site that's made for skilled trades, supplyhouse.com. Supplyhouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining Supply House's free Trade Master program. Every Trade Master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at supplyhouse.com/T-M and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at supplyhouse.com. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service. And I got to say, what I love today about the Locked On Mets insiders is when all this stuff was rumbling about Jorge Lopez and he had been DFA'd, and we'll get into all that in a minute. So many of you sent me a text. He's going to go on the Braves and he's going to have a 1.40 ERA or something along those lines. So I appreciate the insiders for making me laugh, because did I think that too? Absolutely. I thought that Jorge Lopez, sure to be a Brave. I think Michael Tonkin is a sub-2 ERA with the Yankees right now. So regardless, if you want to be part of that texting service and ask me questions, send me comments anytime, you get the starting 9 graphic sent to your phone each day. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. Make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. Find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, the Mets had nothing else they could do when it came to Jorge Lopez. I don't know if the decision to DFA him took place prior to him talking to the media or after it, because it could have led to what he said to the media. We'll see. I don't think so. Because he sort of alluded to, if I'm here tomorrow, I'll show up or whatever it is. So I don't know what happened there. Regardless of the timing of the events, Jorge Lopez talked himself off the team, and maybe brilliant. I mean, honestly, like, it's almost like, you remember in Titanic when Billy Zabka grabs the kid and he gets on the lifeboat? You know what I mean? He grabs the little boy. That's a little boy, whatever. He grabs his kids and women get on the lifeboats and he grabs the kid. I have a child, and hops in the lifeboat, or tries to. Like that right there is what Jorge Lopez sort of did. He hopped on a lifeboat. He said, you know what, screw the Mets, they suck. Let me get out of here. And it's probably the right thing for him. He might end up on a good team and get to avoid Mets baseball. He will get to avoid Mets baseball. We'll see where he ends up. But that was crazy. And so now what's going to happen? Apparently Danny Young is coming back to the Mets. He has thrown the ball very well in Syracuse. Let me pull up his numbers really quick here. I like to see Daniel Nunez come up. Daniel Nunez, another guy, really good numbers in Syracuse, good numbers in the big leagues this year. You look at Danny Young, he has pitched to a 1.59 ERA in Syracuse. He has 18 strikeouts in 11 and a third innings pitched. Pretty high whip. Let me see if that's walk related. I'd imagine it probably is for Danny Young. You're looking at the walks. Yeah, a lot of walks, 11 and 11 and a third. So that's something he's got to keep in check. But now you have another left-hander joining this bullpen that was reported by a guy from The Athletic, Will Salmon. I saw he reported that. So we'll see Danny Young. We'll see. I hope Daniel Nunez come back because I thought he has thrown the ball really well so far. 13 strikeouts and 8 and a third innings pitched in the big league so far. In Syracuse, he's got a 1.38 ERA with 20 strikeouts and 13 innings pitched. And honestly, I like to see some guys come up and almost be the Reed Garrett of early this season. Someone that maybe is, with lack of a better term, too dumb to care. And what I mean by that, not to call Reed Garrett dumb, but more saying that when you have a guy that maybe doesn't have the big league experience, maybe they just trust their stuff and you don't get in your head as much. I like to see the Mets really make some wholesale changes in this bullpen. Edwin Diaz going IL with a shoulder impingement. That's not great, but it also could be a good thing. And for some reason, as bad as it is to see Edwin Diaz hit the IL, and then we'll talk about Pete Alonso in the next segment, I almost feel like those injuries in some way could open up the door for some better things. And then hopefully the guys come back at full health and they can be a big part of the solution. So Edwin Diaz going to the IL for 15 days now. We'll see, if there's any setbacks when he starts rehab assignment. I think that could be a great thing for Edwin because maybe he takes a week off and then you get him in Syracuse for a week. It's like I talked about when he blew that save, or not even a save. He blew the 4-run lead in Miami. I was talking about sending him down. And this is a way, not to say it's a phantom IL stint because the Mets certainly aren't trying to do that. I'm sure there is something in his shoulder. But if Edwin Diaz was lockdown closer Edwin Diaz, the Mets might let him sit on their active roster for 3 days before losing their closer for 2 weeks. When he's not your closer right now and he hasn't pitched well, this gives them the opportunity to rest him, let him get right, get him in some games in Syracuse, and have him work on some stuff. And hopefully he comes back a better pitcher. In the meantime, you don't have a lot of good options. And that's why I want to see some changes. I think Jorge Lopez did the Mets a favor here because he hasn't been great lately. And even when he was good this year, he was still getting hit hard in a lot of different instances. Yes, he competes. Get that. But you look at the last 7 games for Jorge Lopez, he's given up 5 earned runs off 8 hits and 6 innings. It's the 7.50 ERA. Last 15 games for Jorge Lopez, he was working on a 1.85 whip. That's brutal. 9 earned runs, 17 hits and 13 innings, 7 walks, 7 strikeouts. That's some bad numbers. And across the season, 19 strikeouts and 26 and a third innings pitched. That's not great either. A 3.76 ERA doesn't look that bad, but Jorge Lopez was not really getting the job done. And he was forced to pitch in leverage a lot based on the construction of this team. They're getting to a point where I don't know who pitches in leverage. I'm almost hoping the Mets call up Jose Budo and just let him pitch 3 innings every couple days and give you something. Because, man, there's not a lot of good options right now. But to see Danny Young get a shot, considering how successful he's been in AAA and even has been successful in his MLB stint, that's nice. I'd like to see, again, Daniel Nunez come back into the fold here. Drew Smith got lit up on a rehab assignment today. So I don't know if he's going to be coming back anytime soon. We'll see what happens there. He could be a guy that gets DFA'd by the time he proves healthy if he's not the answer. The Mets got to cycle guys. They got to figure it out. I think Jake Diekman has thrown the ball a little bit better as of late. So that's good to know. Adam Ottavino, rough outing, but you're going to have to keep, relying on him. Sean Reed-Foley threw the ball a little bit better today compared to some other guys. So they're going to just try to mash this unit together and find some success. David Stearns has been credited for being able to put together a good bullpen. I was preaching a lot of David Stearns hype early in the season when the bullpen was a big reason for the Mets when they did have that 12-3 run, glorious 12-3 run. It just feels like a mirage at this point, doesn't it? Man. But that's first and foremost for this team. Until they figure it out, it's going to be pretty hard for them to sustain any level of winning because they just keep tossing away games that they're in the mix on. I mean, it's almost like every night you see it where the Mets, whether they have a great pitching performance that keeps them in the game or their lineup is putting up runs, they're either in position to win or they're in a tight game, one-run game or a tie ball game late, and the bullpen just can't hold any of these games. That's got to change. So I'm looking forward to seeing some fresh faces in that bullpen. And I hope the Mets continue to be aggressive in changing out those guys to figure out what can work because they need to be a lot better than this. So that is priority number one to get the Mets on track. The other part of this, though, is could you lose Pete Alonso here? Because here we are, the star of the New York Mets, the guy who is in the news more than anyone because this is a Mets team that is barreling towards a fire sale. And they have this guy who has been the face of the franchise since 2019 when he set the NL rookie home run record, or actually just the MLB rookie home run record. And he hit those 53 bombs, and he's been a 40 home run guy ever since. And he's going into free agency. We don't know if the Mets are going to trade him or they're going to keep him. Well, now he gets hit in the hand, flush. And the original x-rays or the first x-rays have come back negative, but there's still a CT scan. And a lot of times we see it with hand injuries like this, where the original scan is fine, and then the next day we learn something more. But an ironic thing about this, I'm in a position with this Pete Alonso injury where I don't know what to think. Because there's part of me, of course, that wants to see Pete Alonso avoid an IL stint and be back in the lineup soon. That's another part of me that actually thinks for the future of this franchise, Pete Alonso spending some time on the IL might not be the worst thing in the world. So I want to explain my thought process on that in just a minute. First, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. You got the NBA playoffs going on right now. If you think that the Timberwolves can mount a further comeback in that Western Conference Finals series, they're $5 on them. They win, you get the $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Or if you're a Rangers fan, you can throw that money on the Rangers to win against the Florida Panthers. I would not advise putting a $5 money line bet on anything but against the Mets right now, though who knows? Against the Diamondbacks this weekend, maybe there is some better baseball ahead. Regardless, if you want to play, make sure you head over to FanDuel.com. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Speaking of the NBA and the NHL playoffs, if you want to be up to date on all the latest in the world of sports, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. So, I alluded to a very interesting take that the Mets might be better off with Pete Alonso on the IL, and that is not because of his production. While he's been disappointing this season, the Mets are always a better team when Pete Alonso is in the starting lineup. But would it be the worst thing in the world to get a couple weeks, maybe a month, where Mark Vientos and Brett Beatty can play every day at the big league level? It's not the best thing for the Mets in the standings, for their record, but there's been this looming question that we've been talking about for a while now. What do they do with Brett Beatty and Mark Vientos? You can't play them both. You really don't want to have them splitting time down the middle, which is what they've been doing. But they both are MLB players. David Stearns has said that these guys have proven that they are ready for the big leagues and they need to get big league at-bats to develop. I think if David Stearns honestly got some true serum and can go back in time, despite the fact that JD Martinez was a piece that was supposed to help the Mets this year, if he could go back in time and just not take on that contract, even though they might get something for him at the deadline. I think he would go back and reverse that decision and stick with the original plan and have Mark Vientos be the everyday DH, and then you would have been able to let these guys develop. I honestly believe that, because it's hard to look at this team and not be thinking more towards 2025. And right now, if you're thinking about next year, the most important thing is finding out what you have in those two players more than anything else. Francisco Alvarez is going to be the catcher of the future. There's no doubt about that. There's a lot of decision or discussion to be had about the future of third base for the New York Mets, and even the future of first base, because as we've said, Pete Alonso is a free agent, and you might have a decision to make at the deadline on trading Pete Alonso. Wouldn't it be nice to see a month of Mark Vientos potentially thriving to know, all right, maybe we do trade Pete. Maybe we get a good package for Pete that's better now than what we could get on just the qualifying offer, the comp pick. And if you still love Pete Alonso, want him to be your DH long-term, because you're not going to land Juan Soto in free agency, because why in the world would he want to go from winning with the Yankees to this soap opera? And that's going to be a show at some point this season. It's not really worth talking about now, but at some point in time, maybe it's the first Subway Series between these two, I will discuss just that notion of, as much as it's money, which is the only thing that would bring Juan Soto to the Mets, it is just a pretty interesting thing to think about. Like, could he add, how much more would they have to overpay to actually bring him in? And at that rate, is it even worth it? So again, we'll table that for another day. But the point is, Pete Alonso might be the only option in free agency that will keep the lineup at a certain level. He might be the best bat that the Mets could conceivably sign. But you could do the Aroldis Chapman. You could try it. You could send Pete Alonso out, knowing that it'll make it harder to sign him, but maybe the market's not great for him and he could come back home. You also might want to keep all these guys. But even then, it could give you a month where Mark Vientos and Brett Baty play every day. And then you trade JD Martinez, and then you could have Baty, Vientos, and Alonso in a lineup together for August and September. And who knows, maybe that younger, fun Mets team actually gets some things done. Luisangel Acuna is starting to play himself closer to the big leagues. I get texts from our subtexters every day about Acuna. When are we going to see him up? And I keep cautioning people, probably not for a little bit. He's finally finding some success in AAA. Let him enjoy that success. Let him live in that for a little bit, because the jump to the major leagues is going to be 2 times harder, if not more, than the jump from AA to AAA. And he struggled in that first leap. So as much as you want to see Acuna, to me, that is a move the Mets make when they're out of it in the second half, August, September. Now you roll out the red carpet for Luisangel Acuna. And there's a fun team to be had there. But in the interim, as Francisco Lindor is trying to lead his guys and keep the heads above water, if Pete Alonso's out, the move to me is pretty clear. It's Mark Vientos every day at first. It's Brett Baty nearly every day at third. It's maybe Luke Ritter coming up, and now you get another guy who is I want to call him a prospect. You can. Most people don't, because he's older. I think he's 27 now, and there's been throughout his minor league career, there hasn't been a lot of outlets that have shined a light on Luke Ritter, but he's had really good power numbers over the last year and a half, or really 2 years, I guess. 2023 and 2024, basically. And he can play third, he can play second, he can play first. He can stick into the outfield if you need to. But primarily he can back up those 3 positions. He could give Jeff McNeil some blows at second. He could start against left-handed pitching for Brett Baty at third. I would actually love to see Luke Ritter at the big league level for a little bit. And maybe he's a piece. You never really know. So it's not to say I want to see Pete Alonso hit the IL, but I think if Pete Alonso hits the IL, the Mets can learn a lot about what they have. And that might be more important than winning games right now. And you never know. Maybe in that scenario, Alonso's out of the picture. Edwin Diaz is out of the picture. Isn't it like the Ewing theory from Bill Simmons on basketball? Where the other guys are going to step up when the star's out, and all of a sudden you get a better team. I mean, you could see that here. Not to say the Mets are going to get back into the race, but can they be less embarrassing? Can they be something better than the worst team in baseball? I really think they can, and I'm excited to see some fresh blood come into the fold here. Whether that's, of course, Danny Young here filling in the bullpen, if it's Dednell Nunez, if it's any other pitchers. I mean, Eric Orz is another guy that is striking out a lot of batters in Syracuse, so maybe he comes up. we'll see. We'll see all the different machinations the Mets will try here to get their season on track. But this was a crazy day in the land of Mets baseball. And the beautiful thing about this game that we all love to watch, or that we're all so miserably stuck in, there's another game tomorrow night, Arizona Diamondbacks 4-game series. Didn't get a chance to preview that much here on today's show because there was a lot to discuss. On tomorrow's show, I will preview what's left in the series and recap the first game. It'll be a Friday farm report, so I'll try to touch on some minor league guys as well and head off into a Mets weekend where maybe, just maybe, with some lesser competition coming up with the Diamondbacks and the Nationals, the Mets can win a series. Maybe. We'll see them try. I'll be back. Appreciate all of you who tuned in. If you're listening on the audio side, follow, rate, review wherever you get your podcasts. If you are watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, trying to make a push to 9,000 subs. So I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, be part of our texting program, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Follow me at Finkelstein Ryan. You can follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to YouTube to the first ever 24 streaming channel covering everything the world of sports. Of course, we're talking about Locked On Sports Today, which is also streaming every day on Amazon Fire TV.